What's up, faithful? You're listening to another episode of the 49ers Webzone No Huddle podcast, a part of the Odyssey Network. I'm Brian Renick. Al is off today, but I am thrilled to have friends of the show, friends in real life, 49er family, Jason Aponte and Steph Sanchez. Jason and Steph, thanks so much for giving me some time today. How you guys doing?
I'm good, except for the fact I gotta do a show with Jay again, this bozo.
Holy cow, man. I was just going to say, I'm lucky enough to do 2 shows with Steph, man. Gee, like, oh my God, we're off to a blazing start. Now negativity's taking over. I thought the vibes were high.
It's the yin and yang, baby. It's the yin and yang. I know that you guys had a vibe check episode earlier. I just wanted to check in with you guys again. Wanted to do a vibe check before we started here. A lot has happened over the past really kind of 5 days. And it really has, there's been some really high highs and some really low lows since Brandon Ayuk signed his massive extension. But it just feels like it fits with this offseason where it's just kind of been a wonky offseason. There hasn't been, a whole lot that was positive, but now there's been an avalanche of positive and then a little bit of negative, right? Obviously, Brandon Ayuk signs his extension. And then this past weekend, the tragedy in Union Square, Ricky Pearsall, a victim of a attempted robbery and shooting. But, John Lynch comes on today and is like, not only is Ricky doing well, it didn't even nick a rib. Like it went in, it went out. Ricky's at the facility today. Like that's where we are with Ricky Pearsall, which is incredible. And then the low of Ricky Pearsall, and now today, the high of Trent Williams. He's back. The contract is signed. And then they just restructured Deebo Samuel and added an additional $16 million to their cap space for this season, which prior to that, Jason Hurley, who monitors the cap, had the 49ers at $24 million in cap space for this season. If they got 16, we're up to $40 million. Obviously, a lot of that's going to be used to sign Brock next offseason. But in terms of vibes, where are you guys at? You high, you low, you right in the middle? Where are you guys at?
I think we gotta be way high at this point. And yeah, you mentioned it. Like me and Jay had our vibe check earlier on Bully Ball, and I would say like the vibes have gone up since then, and that was just a few hours ago. So yeah, I got a really great feeling about week 1 going into the season. So that's got to be a good feeling for the team as well.
Yeah, the vibes are real high. And I think it's funny because the cycle of how are they going to do this with the salary cap? How can they sign everyone? And then somehow everybody ends up being surprised when they get it done. They restructured Malik Collins, which, from according to Spotrac, that put them up at $50 million before the Trent Williams deal was signed.
Oh my goodness.
And then Trent signs for a little bit more. And then you have $16 million more. I think a lot of fans' minds will wander to, well, we can make a splash trade. But I think it's fully with the intent of trying to roll all that over. So when you consider running it back, now your cap space is looking like this with a chance to bring it over. And now, you go into next season with, do you bring back Lenore and Ward and obviously the Brock Purdy thing? Things feel fine. And now we can actually start to focus on football, which is, I think, probably the biggest issue that we've had with all of these storylines.
Yeah, it's interesting. Al and I have kind of talked all offseason about, if the 49ers end up re-signing or extending Brandon Ayuk, that probably signifies that this is the last season that Deebo Samuel will be a 49er. With this restructure, that goes right out the window because by creating this space, what you're really doing is actually eliminating that out that you had after 2024, where if you cut Deebo, the dead money is actually less than what you would have had to pay him for his base salary. By doing this, I really feel like you are now tied to Deebo through the length of that extension that you initially had, which is just one more season after this. But now you've got, we talked about maybe the window closing after this season, or it feels like the window is closing. And it certainly seems like they're going to keep the band together as long as they can, even with having to pay Brock Purdy. So like you guys, my vibes are high, right? I still don't know what to think about week 1 against the Jets, with Ayuk holding out as long as he did, Trent holding out as long as he did, facing a pretty ferocious Robert Saleh led defense. I'm not super confident, but the fact that they've got everybody back is just, to me, I'm now looking at this season going, well, yeah, just like any season, injuries permitting, I don't see a team that's better than this 49er squad, at least in the NFC. And I think it's full steam ahead again, trying to get that sixth Lombardi. So I wanted to get you guys on, do some kind of season predictions. We'll get to a schedule or record prediction at the end here. But the first thing that I wanted to touch on is, one of the things that was a little unnecessary or a little not unnecessary, a little unpredictable would be to look at Brock Purdy and try and kind of figure out, is he primed for regression? Is he going to be a lot similar than he was last year, better, whatever? But it was hard to think about when we're like, we don't know if he's going to have Brandon Ayuk. We don't know if he's going to have Trent Williams. We've seen the numbers when he doesn't have them. It's not great. But now that he does, where do you guys land on what you think this next season for Brock Purdy is going to look like? Is he going to back up last season with a season as similar or better? Do you think there is some regression there? Where do you guys land on kind of the Brock Purdy prediction for 2024?
I mean, I think, we spoke about this even before the Brandon Ayuk and Trent Williams questions and all that. Assuming that they were going to be here, I think we would say that, we expect Brock Purdy to have a good season, but statistically, maybe not as good as last season, because that's pretty hard to top. I will say that I probably expect efficiency numbers to remain somewhat the same, just because Kyle Shanahan has had a history of his quarterbacks, even with Jimmy Garoppolo, having pretty high efficiency numbers. So I could see that being around the same. But I think there will probably be some regression. Like I could see interceptions, being up. His turnover worthy rate was pretty high, to the point where, you can kind of figure that he was a little lucky at times. And so I do think some of that luck probably a little less this year. And so, yeah, I could see that being a little bit higher. But aside from that, I think he's still going to be a really good quarterback for this team. I think we're going to see some growth, some maturity as far as him being the leader of this offense. I mean, he already was last year, but I think he's ready to take it up a notch. But maybe statistically not as high as last year.
One.
It's hard to duplicate that kind of efficiency, and it was almost jarring to see. So I think if you're just playing log of averages, you'll see that. I think that the regression won't be in his play. It may be in numbers. And what I mean by that is there's a world where he doesn't put up the same numbers, but we can look at him factually and say he's improving and he's a much better quarterback, even if the numbers don't bear it out. Small things about recognizing free rushers, knowing what to do with defenses, understanding a little bit more about line checks and sliding protection and stuff like that. Those are the little things that I think are going to really determine whether Brock Purdy is improving, as opposed to the fact that this offense for a long time has been very efficient on its own. Obviously, last year was taken to a new level, but I think the improvements we're going to see are not going to be told by numbers, I don't think, in any way. And I think that's how we'll be able to judge him. If you're going based on law of averages, then it's so hard to duplicate that again, even if the whole band is back together. And, there could be a world where Brock is improving too, numbers wise, but it's more for me what's going to happen here, what he's going to be doing here in moments where there's a free rusher. Do we slide the protection? Do we understand when to check out of things? That's the improvement that I think is really going to be tangible, that you're going to be able to see. And maybe the stats won't be able to bear that out.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is interesting about this team is, this idea of, we just take it for granted that Kyle Shanahan is probably going to coordinate a top 10 offense any season that he is a play caller. And I agree with that, because history bears it out. As long as he has health at the quarterback position, as long as he has health along the offensive line, he is going to produce a very impressive offense. The one thing that I think is interesting is as efficient and as dominant as that offense has been over the course of his time here, including last season, it has stalled out at the most inopportune times, being the Super Bowl against the Chiefs, against Steve Spagnuolo. And, last year it was pretty evident in the second half what Spagnuolo did, which was to switch to a lot of press man and really get in the face of those 49ers receivers and really force them to win with their drop back passing game, as opposed to, their play action game, their boot game, things like that. I have to wonder, we look at just clues as to maybe Kyle Shanahan is evolving a little bit, or trying to get this offense to evolve a little bit more. And I look at two things specifically. One, the drafting of Ricky Pearsall and Jacob Cowing this season, right? Bringing in two guys who, one guy who very similar to Brandon Ayuk, a route technician, can get open against press man or against man coverage. And then Jacob Cowing, a guy who is fearless over the middle, but also that speed element that could take the top off the defense, which the 49ers haven't really had, right? They had Danny Gray. That didn't really work out. But Danny Gray also, wasn't a guy that was known for his blocking, whatever, his grittiness, if you will. Whereas Jacob Cowing is that's kind of his game. And then on top of that, the initial 53-man roster, I think the biggest shock to me was, now granted this has changed, but the biggest shock was they kept two tight ends, right? Where you could almost pencil in every year. And I believe every year up until now, there was going to be 4 tight ends on that initial 53-man roster, right? And to the point where you're asking yourself, like, how are we letting go this guy so we can keep like Levine Toilolo, right? Like, those are the kind of decisions they've made in the past. They kept 2, right? They brought Eric Saubert back. They have 3, but this is the first time that they haven't kept 4, which again, kind of, and maybe I'm reading it wrong, but I just genuinely believe that trying to maintain Christian McCaffrey's health for a season, I think, is important. And I think one of the ways that you do that is to lessen the load on him, especially in the run game. I'm pretty convinced that the 49ers are going to throw more this season than we've seen in a long time. And even more than we saw last season. And you look at, the fact that you're paying Brandon Ayuk $30 million a year now. You've got Deebo Samuel, who, with this extension, we know is going to be here this year and probably next year as well. You've got one of the best pass catching tight ends in the NFL in George Kittle. You've got all these new weapons to use. I just feel like I agree with you that, it's not fair to think Brock Purdy is going to produce a season like he did before, but I think he might have more opportunity this year, which means that we could see those counting stats go up this year. And it wouldn't surprise me at all. The question is Brock Purdy up to the task? And we're going to find that out, but there's nothing that tells me that he's not. I can't really hold anything that happened in the preseason against him. He was playing without an offensive line for the most part, and with guys that he's not going to throw the ball to in the regular season. So I'm not really concerned with that. But it'll be interesting to see, like I said, do they evolve the offense in preparation to meeting the Chiefs and Steve Spagnuolo in the Super Bowl? Because I have to think that in their minds, that's the inevitability. If we're getting that 6th Lombardi, we got to go through KC.
I mean, you know that the 49ers can beat teams within their conference as built. Like we've seen that. And so, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they're looking at the Chiefs as the final boss and kind of going into this season, trying to find ways that, you can change your offense to be a little more dynamic to be able to, still be able to make plays, even if the Chiefs go press man or something like that. And it's not just the Chiefs. Like, there's going to be other teams who try to do that same thing. Debo's not the greatest route runner, so people are going to try to test that. I'm sure early on in the season, they're going to try to test where Brandon Ayuk is at, conditioning wise and all that. So, it's not just for that. I think you always have to evolve in this league. And, in this draft especially, I was pretty pleased because I did feel like the 49ers did try to find some new aspects into their offense. You mentioned the speed factor. I think that's something they've been missing and they've been wanting. They used to have it with Raheem Mostert in the backfield. Now they got Isaac Guerendo And now they want to see if they can have, someone like Cowan in the mix too, after the Danny Gray experiment didn't really pan out. So just seeing the early return on those guys already too, I feel really great about what those guys can bring this season.
Yeah, and I think, when you're about to, embark on this contract negotiation with Brock Purdy, in which you're going to pay him the going rate, it might behoove you a little bit to, turn the offense to him a little bit. And what I mean by that is the 49ers are not going to just turn into this pass first team. But it may get closer to a 55-45 split, maybe 50-50. And I think that's going to all be on how Brock is progressing. And, kind of just with other teams, when you pay somebody $50 million, you have to lose other people. I'm not going to talk about the 49ers situation specifically, but the idea is if you're paying a quarterback 55-60, it's to cover up the warts that you have other places.
Yep.
Right? Now, is that something the 49ers are willing to do? I don't know, but I would guess just a little bit that maybe they want to see what life could be like if next year they have to make hard decisions in which maybe Javon Hargrave becomes a cap casualty. Maybe Kyle Juszczyk's not on this team next year. Maybe there's some other guys on defense that leave because they get better deals. Now, yes, we have to pay you because you're the most important part of the offense. But can you lift us a little bit, like with the offense, in case our defense takes a step back, or if there's other things that you have to overcome? So I think conventional wisdom would just say, yeah, you probably are going to push this just a little bit further in his direction because you're so confident in him. And we've given you a bunch of weapons as well, too, with Pearsall and Cowing. And we still have all these the litany of all pros. So, yeah, it's going to be kind of interesting how they figure that out and whether it's just going to be strictly we trust Brock or we want to see what you're going to do because we're about to pay you, a hefty sum.
Yeah, honestly, you gotta look at it and go, Kyle Shanahan has a quarterback he can trust for the first time since his last season with Matt Ryan in Atlanta. And we saw what that offense looked like. It was historically good. And we saw what that passing game looked like, which was not just historically good, but historically efficient. And, I don't think Brock has all of the same tools that Matt Ryan has, but he's got a lot of them. I think the only one that he's missing is I think Matt Ryan's arm was a little bit better. And I think there was a little bit more with Taylor Gabriel, a little bit more over the top, but we also might see Kyle Shanahan trying to push that a little bit more, especially early in the season, just to see where he's at as he, again, tries to kind of figure out where is this offense going to take a step forward. And evolve a little bit with a trigger man that I finally trust, because let's be perfectly honest. He did not trust Jimmy Garoppolo. We know that by play calling. We know that, hindsight being 2020, all of that stuff. This is
Jimmy
the first time where
he's in LA catching strays.
Well, he's not in LA catching strays because he's, suspended for the first 4
weeks. Okay.
So he's off somewhere, but yeah, it just, like I said, this is the first time I'm not saying that he didn't trust Brock last season, but coming off an arm injury, you don't know what you have in him. You still only had, 7-8 games with him. That's not enough to engender trust. Now you had a full season where you've seen him operate your offense. And outside of that stretch where, they only scored 17, which largely was because Trent was hurt and then out, and then Debo was out. You've got proof of concept now. And so, are you going to turn the keys over? And again, both to evolve the offense, but also Kyle Shanahan loves him some CMC, and he's already talked about, we need to save him from himself. That's the key. Again, health in the postseason more than health in the regular season. And really you're probably chasing one, maybe two teams in the NFC for that 1 seed. I think it's the Lions. And then, you could argue, is it the Eagles? Is it the Cowboys? Is it the Packers? Right. I think those 5 teams, the 49ers, the Lions, the Packers, the Cowboys, and the Eagles are probably the top 5 in the NFC. And this is a team that is old and probably would love to have that 1 bye. And so, you got to kind of balance, do we just go all in to get that bye and then hope for health, or do we, dial it back and maybe not get the bye, but we go into that season with CMC healthy, with Trent healthy, with, with all these guys. This is the first season, I think, where we really look at it and go, this is a team whose offense is going to carry them more than the defense. Where are you guys at in terms of vibes on the defense? Are you optimistic? Do you feel like, getting away from, last season and bringing in Sorensen as the play caller, and then bringing in Staley as kind of a, just an overall like sounding board, but also bringing in coverage concepts that, I think will help this team. Are you guys optimistic? Or I know for Al and I, our big thing is we are optimistic, but we're not like fully on board until we see what this run defense looks like.
That's exactly what I was saying this morning, that, the run defense is still very much a question mark to me. I know the preseason is a preseason, but that didn't exactly encourage me on anything. So I'm just going to hold my breath and wait to see what it looks like in the regular season. Maybe it has improved, right? But we just won't know. And week 1 presents a huge test because you got Breece Hall, a revamped Jets offensive line as well. They're going to try to run the ball and ease Aaron Rodgers back into action. So we'll find out, I think, pretty soon what that run defense is going to look like. I have, no worries about the secondary. I think it's going to be maybe one of the best secondaries in the league because you got one of the best corners in the game, or 2 of the best corners, I think, in Mooney Ward and Lenore. I really think Lenore is going to take a leap this year and probably put together an all-pro season. So you got those 2 guys, and I think they've improved like their third corner as well.
Yes.
In whether it's Isaac Yiadom or Renardo Green, quite honestly, whoever it is. And me and Jay were talking about that earlier too, that we don't really know who's going to be that third corner to come in, but I feel confident either one of those guys, whatever the 49ers decide on that one. So the cornerback room's way better. I think Jair Brown is going to have a tremendous year this year as well. I liked what I saw from George Odom as well in the secondary. I think he's going to do just fine while Hufanga, we're still waiting on him. So I guess the biggest question mark for me is the run defense. I think the pass rush, they'll figure out a way to still continue to be productive with Bosa and Floyd. But yeah, it's the biggest question mark still.
Yeah, and I think this defense is going to be a lot different than what we've seen with the way that they've built it in years past. It's been inside out, and now it looks outside in, right? Like, dare I say the 49ers might have some coverage sacks this season. That's pretty insane to think, right?
Yes.
While the 49ers defensive line is probably not as deep as it's been, since 2019, like I would say that, and I don't think this is hyperbole, this is probably the least amount of depth that they've had on the defensive line in terms of star power, like across the board, right? You lose Armstead, you're still trying to figure out the other spots and everything as well too. You bring in a very solid player, Emily Collins, who I think is going to fit right in. Obviously, Leonard Floyd is very durable, but what I mean is the pass rush isn't going to be the driving force. And how much of what's happened in the Super Bowl in big moments when holding's not called and you need secondary on the back end,
Yes.
what matters more, right? So I'm fairly confident in this defense, and I think just a step up in the run defense. Like, it doesn't even have to be jarring. Like, they don't even have to turn into a top 5 run defense. I mean, that would be great, but just a small little bit of that. They've already got the pass defense in tow, and with the way that this secondary is going to cover, I think there's a lot of positives to be gained from here, and I'm confident. I just think there's almost no shot that they're as bad as they were last year on run defense. I think what's going to change the conversation is how much they've improved on run defense. And if it's a massive improvement in which they're stingy, the things become really, really like, man, this is going to be a top 5 defense like this season. And they were top 10 last year, even with the run defense like that. So yeah, I think the secondary is going to be the way the 49ers actually generate the pressure now. And it's going to be fun to watch.
I agree. I mean, for the first time in the Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch era, we can say confidently that we are not concerned about the secondary at all. In fact, it is arguably the strength of that defense, whereas in years past, it's been that defensive line. That's a great point, Jay. I didn't even think about that in terms of, what are some things that you have learned as an organization from your 2 Super Bowl losses? Well, as fans, we've bitched and moaned and pointed out all the time, all the holding that doesn't get called. And it certainly seems like that's just par for the course. And so how do you course correct? How do you go from, look, we built this defense around this defensive line to get to the quarterback, but if the refs aren't going to allow that, how can we evolve? And so you see them bring in Isaac Yadam, you see them draft Renardo Green, you see them draft Malik Mustafa, who I think is going to play a large role in this defense at some point. I love Mustafa, and I love the way he plays the game. A little reckless right now, and I think the between the ears part is where his growth needs to come, but reminds me of Hufanga in that he's just always around the ball, always a heat-seeking missile, just ready to do damage to any ball carrier that he finds. But then you also have Rock Ya-Sin as another vet that you can bring in, right? You're not messing around with Ambry Thomas anymore. You're not messing around with Samuel Womack. You've got a long outside corner development guy in Darrell Luter. Another guy that could end up having a larger role starting next year, because I just think that they have to choose between Lenore and Ward at the end of the season. And I would assume it would be Lenore as the younger player. But again, like you guys said, we're going to have to see when it comes to the run defense, because, you look at this opening schedule, and 3 of the first 5 teams that they play are tremendous running teams. Teams that are built around the run, in the Jets, the Rams, and the Cardinals. And we'll get to the schedule here in a little bit. But, when we've talked about both sides of the ball and kind of where we think, where we're excited, maybe where we're not. But when it comes to MVP of each side of the ball, where do you guys stand on your offensive MVP? If obviously, CMC, Brock Purdy, I mean, it's hard to think anything else, but, where do you guys stand on, at the end of the season, when we look back and we look at this offense, we go, man, it's because of this dude that this offense was the way that it was.
Yeah, I think either of Brock or CMC would be a very low-hanging fruit type of answers. So I'll give a different one here. I'm gonna say Debo, because
Nice.
I just think like he's primed to have a big year. The offseason that he's had, looked to be like one of the best he's had since he's been in the league. And it looked like it translated, at least through training camp. And so I think it's going to carry into the season as well. And, yeah, I talked about it already. He's not the best route runner, but he's the best at what he does do well. So I think the 49ers going to find or continue to have that role for him in this offense. And I think he's going to have a big year.
Yeah, same. One podcast, one brain. I mean, it's got to be Deebo Samuel, right? Like, I think the way that we were thinking before we heard about the restructure, that this was going to be a contract year. I also think that Deebo hears a lot of the I can't run routes, or, he can't run routes or anything like that. Again, no disrespect to, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, but they've never carried the 49ers the way that Deebo Samuel has. And a lot of people are lost on that, because he took that into his contract negotiations and things got, ugly. But that might have been one of the most single greatest offensive seasons of any 49er ever.
Yeah.
And I think Deebo has a lot on his mind. He came in, very much, in shape. I think he hears it all. And I think Deebo is definitely someone who is motivated to not only quiet critics, but also put himself in a position where, whether he's on this roster this year or next year or someone else, he's going to ask for a pay increase. The only way you do that is that you hoop like you do in a contract year. So I think it has to be Deebo Samuel.
Yeah, it's hard to, if we're not going to pick CMC or Brock, it's hard not to pick Deebo. I mean, even Brandon Ayuk with a new contract, $30 million a year. I think Ayuk can build upon last season. I think for him, it's increasing those touchdowns. He only had 7 last season, making himself a red zone target. I think there is a world where Brandon Ayuk, gets up to 1,400, 1,500 yards, and 10 touchdowns. I think that'd be an incredible season for him. But if he gets there, I think, again, it's because either Deebo doesn't put up the numbers we think he could, or I don't know, something major happens where, Ayuk becomes the focal point of the offense. But there's just so many mouths to feed that it's hard not to pick either the guy that gets them the ball or the guy that runs the ball, and that's CMC. And so I agree with you guys. I think Debo is probably number 3 if you're ranking most likely to be MVP. But yeah, it's hard to pick against him if you're not picking Purdy or CMC. What about on the defensive side of the ball? We talked a lot about the secondary. Obviously, the defensive line still has the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL in Nick Bosa. We've got him on the show with us, sitting in there in the background as well, number 97. Who do you guys think, if you're saying like this defense ends up being a top 10 unit, who do you think has the most effect on that happening?
For one, I'll say your audio listener is going to be very confused when you said Bosa was on the show, but I don't know. I feel like I almost have to say Bosa, but again, I don't want to go with the low hanging fruit. So if I had to give a different answer, I'm going to say Jair Brown. I mean, I think we were starting to see the trajectory for him in the playoffs last season. He was improving each and every week. I think even in this year's preseason, we were seeing like he'd make a play and I'm like, get that guy out of there. I've seen enough, So I think it's going to be like that during the season as well. I think he's just ready to take that next step. I think he's already a leader in that secondary as well, which is crazy to say because he's just a second-year player, but he's going to look like a vet, I think, in year 2. So I'm going to say him.
If you're not going to take sometimes the sweetest fruit is the lowest hanging. So yeah, it's Nick Bosa.
Go for it.
Look, it's Nick Bosa. I think him coming out and talking about how he felt the contract negotiations leading up to week 1, no training camp kind of affected him for a slow start. By the way, the most pressures that he's ever had in any season as a 49er. So not too bad. Didn't notch his first save. First save got him in baseball mode. His first sack until week 3. But I think he hears it all as well, too. And I think he's going to be somebody that they're going to look to. He's probably going to be named a captain. I think he's going to be somebody who puts up his 15 and a half, 16, 17 sacks. So I think it's definitely going to be Nick Bosa. And don't be surprised if Nick Bosa is the happy recipient of some cover sacks. So I think 100%, I think it's pretty easy to say Nick Bosa because he has to become a leader on his defense. The defensive line depth isn't what it used to be. Forget the contract. You're just one of the best edge rushers in football. And what do? Disrupt. And I think that's exactly what he's going to do all season.
So let me ask you this question then. 18 and a half is his high output for sacks in a season. Over under 18 this season.
Over.
I like it. Too. I like it. I think I'm going to go with a guy that we talked about is in a contract year. A guy who hasn't even engaged in extension negotiations because he wanted to bet on himself, and that's Diamador Lenore. I think his inside-outside versatility, the fact that he will slide into nickel when they're in nickel defense, and I think they're going to be in nickel defense a lot. I think he's going to lead this team in interceptions, and I think he could also sneaky get in there with 4 or 5 sacks as well as a blitzing, nickel corner. And so I'm going to go with Diamador Lenore just because, again, it is a contract year. He's trying to prove himself, and I genuinely believe that he's going to have a monster season. And I'm excited for it because, like I said, I think they're going to choose between one of those two, Lenore and Ward, and I think Lenore is the guy they want. It's the guy they drafted. He's younger. But again, I mean, they just restructured Debo. Who knows? Maybe they're going to throw money at both those guys. And, we're like, how the hell did they do this? And Prague's like, I just do what I do. And we move forward. So,
Brian, real quick, too.
Yeah.
My bad. Just about Nick Bosa. If Nick Bosa notches 15 sacks this year, he will become the 3rd player since 1982 with at least 15 in 3 of his first 6 seasons. The only other 2, J.J. Watt and Reggie White. Pretty good company. So I think he's definitely shooting for at least that.
Excellent company. I love it. All right. Well, want to end this with you guys looking at the season schedule. Again, one of the most useless predictions in most of sports is trying to predict a team's record before a single snap has been achieved, but that is what we will do here. And so we're going to break it up by chunks of 5, right? It is a 17-week season. The only reason I'm doing that is because when the 49ers put out their season schedule graphic, they did it in chunks of 5. So that's what we'll do here. And so the first 5 weeks of the season, the 49ers are home against the Jets, at the Vikings, at the Rams, home against the Patriots, and home against the Cardinals. First 5 games, record after the first 5 games of the season. Steph, what do you have, Matt?
Oh God. I don't remember, because I know I did a show where I did the predictions. Let me see if I could pull it up, but I'm gonna say they're 4-1.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Where's
got
their
4-1. One of those is going to be a weird game, like a really weird game.
I can see week 2 being weird.
Yeah, like being a weird game in Minnesota. They just can't win there, like regardless, right?
What is
like,
that,
it's
by
just,
the way?
yeah, I don't know.
Short week 2, traveling.
And if anybody can snap the curse, it's surely Sam Darnold, right? But yeah, it's still the NFL, right? Like, and there's still weird games, right? Now, I don't know if this loss comes week 1. I don't know if it comes to the Rams. I definitely don't think it comes against the Patriots. But I do think it's one of those weird games with like the Vikings or perhaps the Cardinals, who could find themselves to be a little bit more annoying this season if Kyler Murray is the guy that he used to be.
Yeah, it's hard. Like I've been wary of week 1 for a long time now, especially with the extended holdouts of Brandon Ayuk and Trent Williams. And the fact that they're back is great, but they're back with just a week to prepare. It scares me a little bit. That Jets defense is really good. And obviously Aaron Rodgers is Aaron Rodgers. And, he is coming off an Achilles tear, but I have to think that, regardless of that, he has still got that brain that makes him as dangerous as ever. I agree with you guys. I think 4-1. I honestly, I've pinned a loss in week 1 for a while. I don't want to walk away from that. I can't see them losing to Sam Darnold. Even though they've never won in,
They never win in Minnesota.
They never win in Minnesota. And Brian Flores obviously gave Brock Purdy fits last year. And I'm sure he'll do that again this year, but he will have his full complement, again, injuries permitting, his full complement of weapons and protection in front of him. So again, I'm hard. That's a weird one. That Cardinals one scares me a little bit as well. We just talked about the run defense, and we don't know what to expect from that. The Cardinals are going to run the ball down your throat, and so are the Rams. But the Rams defense is, I have no concerns about the Rams defense at all. That Rams team is probably going to win games in shootouts. I'm confident in that. But that Cardinals game, I don't know what to expect from the Cardinals defense. But it does scare me, because honestly, it's just, if you can keep the ball out of the 49ers offensive hands, then you're probably have a good shot at winning. And you do that by running the ball, and the Cardinals can do that. But I'll go 4-1 as well, with my loss coming week 1 against
One more
the
funny
Jets.
thing. More funny thing about that Minnesota game is, the 49ers just lost Debo and Trent, but it was on a short week, like Steph said, and the Vikings didn't even have Justin Jefferson.
Oh God.
And we're all sitting there like, how is this team going to compete? How are they going to compete with the 49ers, regardless of the fact that they didn't have Debo and Trent? They still were the far better football team than the Minnesota Vikings. Yeah. But sure enough, football happens, and it's strange. You go back to all the times that they've been there, they've lost all of those games for different reasons. In 2018, Jimmy Garoppolo's first start, right? He throws to Pettis in the back of the end zone. You start to feel like, okay, well, this next one, we'll get him. Christian McCaffrey's going to be there. Everybody's going to be fine. It's still the Vikings. Nope, you got that crazy play at the end of the half with Steve Wilkes calling that zero blitz and no Justin Jefferson. And yes, somehow they walk away with a win. And it was in primetime with Kirk.
Yeah.
Like, Kirk won a primetime game against the Niners.
Yeah. Yikes. All right, our second 5-week block, week 6 at Seattle, another Thursday night at Seattle game. And maybe a bit of a trap game, because week 7, you're home against those damn Chiefs. And then week 8, another home game against the Cowboys. And then week 9 is a bye week. Love that bye week, by the way. 8 games, bye week. Then you got the last 9 Great bye week for them. Thank God it's not like week 4 for that would be outrageous. And then you come off your bye and you have to travel out to Tampa Bay against the Buccaneers. So again, at Seattle, home for the Chiefs and the Cowboys, bye, and then at Tampa Bay. So 4 games there. All of us have them 4-1 through their first 5. What will be their record through their first 10 weeks?
I'm gonna
8
say,
games.
well, now you're making me do math because I was ready to say 3-1.
3-1. All right,
7-2, I get. Yes, thank you.
All right.
7
All right.
7-2. And I think that one loss is gonna be the Chiefs because like I think the 49ers have to show me that they can beat the Chiefs until I think that they could. So I think that's an easy one, honestly. I think the Seahawks, obviously with Mike McDonald, are gonna be better defensively. And so I'll wait for that, but I don't think it'll be in week 6 where they'll start hitting their stride. So when we get to week 11, it'll be a little more interesting. In week 8, the opposite of what I said about the Chiefs, the Cowboys need to show me they could beat the 49ers before I ever think otherwise. So that one's an easy one for me as well.
Yeah, 7-2, and Steph's taking all my points. It's just like in the same way that I can't ever say there's going to be a W over the Chiefs. Batman couldn't interrogate and beat me up to make me think that the Dallas Cowboys are ever going to. I can say out of my mouth that the Dallas Cowboys are going to beat the Niners. So the same way that I can't ever say, oh, they're going to confidently beat the Chiefs, I know for a fact the Cowboys can't beat the 49ers. So yeah, give me 7-1 with Seattle. I still need to see it. I don't see it with there either. But as long as it's the Chiefs, I think it would be unwise to, just say, oh, yeah, the 49ers are going to win this one.
Well, and much like what people talk about with the Kyle Shanahan offense, how it's a difficult offense to digest. It takes people a while to get used to it. Mike McDonald's defense is the same way. You look at that defense his first year in Baltimore, it was nowhere near as good as it was last season because the players were still getting used to, the system. And the same thing is going to be for the Seahawks. We're talking week 6. They're still trying to figure things out, I would assume. So I'm not as worried about the defense as I will be. They play again in week 11. I mean, you got to prove that you can beat the Chiefs. And until you do, that's going to get chalked up as a loss. And then I think they have no problem going to Tampa Bay and winning that game, especially coming off a bye week. And so I think we're all in agreement here. We've got them at 7-2. And since we're all in agreement, that means that likely they won't be 7-2 by then, because let's be perfectly honest, when you're in too much of an agreement, some things are going to happen, I would assume. And so we get into to really where the 49ers under Kyle Shanahan have really thrived. And that is once you get into November. And that's the other thing. They're playing the Chiefs in October, and the 49ers are under Kyle Shanahan have been really shitty in October. And so that's another, whatever it is, I don't know. I mean, someone can go look it up, but I'm fairly certain that under Kyle Shanahan, they have a losing record in October. Not sure what that's about, but that's where that Chiefs game falls. So again, I'm going to chalk that up as a loss. But then they start that week 11. So they travel to Tampa Bay and then fly back home against the Seahawks. And then at Green Bay, going to be a great game. At Buffalo, going to be a great game. Home for Caleb Williams and the Bears, and then home for the Rams. So home against the Seahawks, at Packers, at Bills, home against the Bears and the Rams. Steph, in that 5-game stretch, what do you got for them as a record?
I'm going to go 3-2 in this one. And I don't really know which one it's going to be. Like I already talked about the Seahawks. By week 11, maybe, they're getting into a stride a little bit with their defense, and maybe they can pull an upset there. But really, I mean, obviously the concerning games are against the Packers and the Bills, right? On the road. Weather could be a factor. You got that one against the Bills on prime time. So I don't know exactly which one the 49ers will end up losing, but it wouldn't even shock me if they lost 2 in a row against the Packers and Bills. I would hate that, but I guess just in any of those games, 3-2.
Yeah, I'd say 3-2 as well. I think the Buffalo game is the one that I'm definitely looking at, and the Packers one is definitely going to be tough. I still think the 49ers find a way to get that one done. There's going to be another weird game in there as well, too. And as far as Seattle, like, yes, Mike McDonald is a great defensive mind, but I also want to remind people that he's not bringing over Kyle Hamilton and
Right.
Patrick Queen and all those guys from Baltimore
Yeah.
over either. So, yeah, you can schematically dial it up, but he's able to do all those things in Baltimore because they had one of the best defenses in football at almost every single level. Seattle doesn't have anything near there. So, yeah, you're going to put them in better opportunities to succeed. But unless he's bringing over the Ravens, and that was part of the deal, I'm not going to be necessarily worried about the Seattle Seahawks. So as long as the Ravens still play in Baltimore, that's, I don't really care who the coach is for Seattle. But yeah, it's going to be this stretch where there's going to be some close games, and there's going to be some games where like one opportunity, a fumble in a critical moment, kind of changes things. A lot of traveling, cold, all that stuff. The 49ers are built to stand it, but it's a little bit arrogant to just say they're going to walk through and be 5-0 against all these teams.
100%. Yeah. I mean, there's you've got 3 playoff hopefuls in that stretch, in the Packers, the Bills, and the Rams. I think the Bears could be sneaky good this year with the talent they have on defense and what they have surrounding Caleb Williams. Now, obviously, they have a rookie quarterback, but they've got a pretty impressive supporting cast. I think they're going to be better than people probably anticipate. I think all of those games are going to be tough. I think, again, you got to give this team, from what they've proven to us in the past, that they are built for this time of year. And so I think 3-2 is fair. 4-1, I think is optimistic, but still there. What I'm interested to see is if they stay somewhere between that Packers and Bills game, because it's the only travel they have where they're in the Midwest or East Coast for 2 straight games. But that's also that Packers game is right around Thanksgiving, so I'm not sure that they would do that to their players and their families. But again, I think the Packers and the Lions are the 2 biggest threats in the NFC, and the fact that they play them both in the regular season, I think is important. I think they end up beating the Packers. I'm going to give them a loss to the Bills, and then I'm actually going to give them a loss to the Rams on a short week on a Thursday. Again, maybe I'm crazy because it's the regular season and Kyle Shanahan doesn't lose to Sean McVay, but Sean's got to figure it out at some point. So, but yeah, I'm going to give them 3-2, which again, for all of us, we're at this point, we are at 11-4. And then the 3 remaining games at Miami, which again might be a great game, might not, depending on what the injury luck looks like for Mike McDaniel and his squad. And then home for the Lions, and then you finish the season at the Cardinals. The fact that they play the Lions in week 17, I think, is really, really important because you're really kind of, I think that's the team that you have to beat, and it'll be interesting to see if, perhaps the Lions are already in a spot where they've locked up the 1 seed. But I don't anticipate that. I think the AFC North is going to beat each other up a little bit. But that is an interesting stretch to end the season. So at Miami, home against the Lions, and then at Arizona.
All right, so within these last 3 games, I'm going to go 2-1, and I have the 49ers beating the Dolphins just because, Kyle dials it up against his former coaches, his former proteges. So I think they're going to have the edge in that one. And I actually, you guys might hate this, but I have the Lions maybe beating the Niners on that Monday Night Football game. I just think the Lions will need it more or want it more just because of how their season ended, at the hands of the 49ers in the playoffs. And so that's fine. They can have the regular season win. I also predict the 49ers will beat them again in the playoffs to send them home. So I'm cool with them losing that week 17 one. And then obviously I'm not worried about the Cardinals in the least bit. So I have them closing out the season in a win too.
Man, what happened to the game I love, Steph? 3-0, and the Lions get it too. 3-0. This one, you finish the season strong. You lock up the number 1 seed after knocking off the Lions, and you let them know you're close, but you still ain't the big dog in the yard. Yeah, the 49ers are going to have a lot to say in that game because people are going to just bring up like what happened in the NFC Championship. Nope, 3-0. Like I think that's another game where and Steph's bang on with the protege thing. Oh, protege, maybe that's why we should stop worrying about the Jets in week 1. Protege, oh, okay, you're on the other side. Let's go get him. Like let's go play ball. So yeah, I think the Miami game is a win. I think they really, really take it to Detroit to show that last year wasn't just them screwing it up and the 49ers finding a way to come back, which also should be for the number 1 seed if everything works out for what I think it's going to be. So, yeah, give me 3-0 with the 49ers rolling in and they don't lose another game all the way to New Orleans.
Yeah, I think that again, the Lions are a different team away from home, which is why it's important to make sure that they don't get the 1 seed because they are tough to beat in the dome. Jared Goff does not play the same outdoors, even though it won't be rainy or anything. He'll be playing in his backyard where he played college football. But and again, I'm always going to bet against Jared Goff in a big game because let's be perfectly honest. We watched him last game, right? It wasn't Jared Goff. It was the running game and it was mental mistakes by the 49ers that got them in that hole. And when push came to shove and Jared Goff had to make plays, the 49ers absolutely made him look silly. And I anticipate that again. Again, I don't believe in the Dolphins until they can win games after, October. And then the Cardinals are, they're the Cardinals. No idea what to expect from them. But I, again, anticipate wrapping up home field after that Lions game. So maybe they lose that game. Maybe they don't. It might not matter. Who knows? But we'll say 3-0, which means that Jay and I have them at 13-4. Steph has them at 12-5. I feels pretty spot on. I believe the over-under right now is 11.5. So we're all betting the over there. But it just feels like this team with the roster talent and everything, it's hard not to anticipate at least 11 wins. And then you've got kind of a, plus or minus 2, if you will, or I would say 12 wins plus or minus 2. I don't think they get to 14, but we'll see, especially with health permitting. Steph and Jay, I genuinely appreciate your time. Friends of the show, always welcome. If you haven't already, subscribe to their podcast, the Bully Ball Podcast. Subscribe to Jay's YouTube channel, Steph's YouTube channel. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just get all the 49ers content you can get. Get overwhelmed with it, right? Just put it in your veins. Just don't listen to anything else, right? Just 49ers content 24/7. Guys, again, thank you so much. Anything you want to plug before we head on out of here?
No, I think you did it perfectly. Steph 49K on all the social media platforms.
Yep, and Jason Aponte 2103 on Twitter. I refuse to call it X.
I will never call it X. It will only ever be Twitter. I appreciate you, Jay. I appreciate you, Steph. For Al, who's not here, I'm Brian Renick. This is the 49ers Webzone No Huddle Podcast. Later.